Okay, so thanks guys for coming, listening to me talk about handlebars for 20 minutes. I know that everybody just ate lunch, so I'll try not to put you to sleep. This talk is plumbing the depths of handlebars. My name is Ryan Lewis. This is my internet details, so you can follow me or see what I'm up to. I'm at Ryan Murakami on Twitter and GitHub, and that's my personal page. So I am a web engineer at Expedia. Like many of you are probably web engineers as well. I do web stuff. The other thing I do that is notable is I run a record label that releases Japanese underground music. And that's actually what got me into web development 15 years ago. My label needed a site and an e-commerce platform, and I didn't have any money, so I just had to teach myself. And the other thing I do is I teach and record courses at Pluralsight, which Pluralsight's a really big online e-learning platform, and they have courses on pretty much anything you can imagine, and it's really high quality. This year I did 2 courses. One was on Happy, which you may be familiar with, the Node web framework. And then a few months ago I released a course on Handlebars, which is really the inspiration for this talk. Here's the course. You can go check it out if you have a Pluralsight subscription. So when I was doing the research for this course, I've been using Handlebars for about 3 years. What I realized was there was a lot of things I didn't know. Even though I'd been using it in pretty much all of my projects, there were a lot of details, there were a lot of kind of questions that I asked myself that I never really had a chance to answer because I was too busy getting something out there. So basically, I thought, you know, if I have some things that I didn't know, maybe you guys might benefit from some of the research I did. So we've got 15 bullet points. I've got like 13 minutes left, so I'm going to speed through them, and we'll save questions till the end. So helpers. So this is one of the first questions I had. In Handlebars, you have the register helper API function, and you pass the name of a helper, and then you pass some function, and then you can use it in your templates. So my question was, where do these helpers go once they've been registered? So Handlebars has a global helpers property hash that stores the helpers, and they sync up. The name that you give it is the property on there. So if you ever register a helper and it doesn't seem to be working, you can go and you can check and you can make sure it actually exists, which is nice to know. Partials are something a little bit similar. So register partial, it's another API function. You give it your name, you give it some string partial template, and this is going to set this up in the partials hash, so it's going to be globally available in any template that you use. And again, the name is set up as the key for that. And it's set up as a string for the value. Now, partials are a little bit different. Once you actually render that partial in some template, Handlebars will go in and it needs to compile that string, right? It doesn't use that string just by itself. So it will compile that string so it's ready to render stuff, and then it will actually replace that in the partials hash. The value will be the function then, it won't be the string anymore. So that's kind of a weird little gotcha where it flips once it's been rendered, so just be aware that that is a thing. Helpers first. So let's look at this scenario. We register some helper, we call it isCorrect, it returns false, right? We've also got some context data which has isCorrect, and it's going to have the isCorrect property set to true. Both of these match exactly. If I were to use this if built-in conditional helper, should it print out I'm right or should it not print out anything is the question. And the answer is it doesn't print out anything. It's completely empty. The isCorrect is going to be pulled from the helper first before it looks at the context data. So this is something to be aware when you're setting up your helpers, you're setting up your properties on context data. And one way you can get around this is whenever you're referencing properties in your data, you can prefix them with this. So you could say this.isCorrect. Now that's going to be really painful to do that for every property you reference. So my suggestion, yes, are you kidding me? My suggestion is you can postfix all your helpers with helper. It seems simple, but it will help avoid any collisions. Conditional block syntax. So Handlebars implements the mustache spec. And as part of that, you're able to use conditional block syntax. Well, I didn't know that before I was doing my research, and typically if I wanted to do some conditional block, I would use the built-in if helper with a single property, and that would evaluate the truthiness of this. With Handlebars, you can actually just say hash is correct. It will evaluate the truthiness, the existence, or the true or false value, and this example would print out is correct. Dogs are the best. Sorry, cat lovers. All right, another thing I learned is that there are a lot of Handlebars implementations. So Handlebars is implemented in JavaScript, but there's also Handlebars available in Java, .NET, Python, and PHP. And what's nice is you can have your Handlebars templates and you can use them in multiple languages, which is nice if you don't really control the back end or anything like that. What is to be known about these is each implementation is subject to the developer's whims, so they may not implement the entire Handlebars API, so just beware of that. And Node loves Handlebars. So Handlebars is JavaScript, of course, but popular Node web frameworks have really make it really, really easy to use Handlebars in your projects. So with Happy and Express, with just a few lines, you can get Handlebars set up to render all your views, and then you're good to go. So you don't really have there's not really any barrier to entry for this, so go wild. And Handlebars development is alive. So Handlebars has been around since pre-February 2011. This is just when the GitHub record of time that I could find started. And development kind of went slow in the beginning, but it's really picked up recently. Version 4.0 just landed a few months ago. And each one of these, they aren't vanity releases. They actually have features. So it's really cool. Handlebars isn't going to be going anywhere for a while, so it's a safe bet if you're trying to decide on a templating library. Handlebars is fully supported. Back to helpers. So helpers are JavaScript, and because they're JavaScript, there is this keyword. And I was curious, what is this in helpers? Typically, you register a helper, and if you want to get some input into your helper, you'll define some arguments for it. What's interesting is that you don't actually need to do this. So in this example, helper is going to return this.needsHelp. So what would that be? If you pass some context data, which has a needsHelp property, which says sure do, and you call helper like so, you will get sure do will be the output. This is the current context data that you have passed into your template, which is really nice. You don't have to go around with your passing in a lot of arguments if you just need to access the current data context. And there's our Otter helper. One caveat to that, because it's available, this is also mutable in your helpers. So if maybe you weren't aware of that and you think that for some reason you're inside an object or something and you say this.needsHelp equals course not, and you pass in some context data where you're saying sure do need help, and then you call helper and then you output the result of the current, what does needs help mean in my current context of data, what you'll see is it will equal course not, which means that this is completely mutable, just like you would expect in JavaScript. But when you're inside a templating language, usually you don't want to be modifying your state with your templates. So just be careful with that. Executing function properties. So before I did this class, I was a helper fiend. I used a lot. Anytime I wanted to run some JavaScript, I made a new helper. Which is perfectly fine, but helpers are global, and sometimes you want something a little more intimate to work with in your JavaScript. And so what I learned is that with part of the mustache spec, Handlebars will actually execute your properties that are functions on your objects. So here's an example of that. This is our context object that we've got, and we've got some property called getIt, which is a function that returns got it. These are all completely useless examples. We call getIt in our template, and Handlebars will execute that function and output the result of that function. And why is this useful? Well, with your JavaScript objects, when you've got functions in them, you can use them in your JavaScript and you can use them in your templates, and you can also unit test them as usual, which is really convenient. So it's nice to be able to use these things in multiple places. Back to partials. So partials have a really nice feature in that when you're declaring, not when you're declaring them, when you're using them in your templates, you can define scope for them. So you can set variables to whatever you want. So here's an example. So I'm registering a partial. It's called my partial. It's going to output this, the value of the dog variable. And when I call my partial, I can actually assign a value to that dog variable. I can assign panda. And then when I call my partial, it will actually output panda, which is super nice because, there's our panda dog, because we can reuse these partials and we can make them more extendable, more modular. And this also really reminds me of the way that you use components in Ember. If you're an Ember user, this might look familiar. All right, at data variables. So because handlebars, here's my little contrived example for debug. And basically debug is, this is a new syntax. So you have a register decorator API function, and you also have an unregister decorator. So you give it some title for your decorator, which in this case is debug, and then you also pass it some JavaScript function to execute when you call this decorator. In this case, I'm getting the current data context that I'm at, and I'm just console logging it to the console. All right, so when you use it, you'll use the asterisk syntax. So it will say asterisk debug and whatever your data is and whatever else in your template. And that will actually run that JavaScript, and it will do what the JavaScript does, which is logging to the console. So you can imagine that decorators, again, just improve the ability for you to do more in your template, have a greater separation of concerns when you're trying to think through these things. And one of the main reasons was to implement this inline partial. White space. So if you're already a user of Handlebars, hopefully this will be news to you because it's a lifesaver. If you've ever looked at the output of a Handlebars template, once it's actually rendered the HTML, it looks insane. Like there's like spaces. There's like no rhyme or reason to where things are being put and how things are being rendered. And that's mainly because things like comments, things like helpers don't actually, sometimes they don't have output, and so Handlebars will just throw a new line in there. So because it's a little bit crazy like that, Handlebars also gives you the option to control that white space with the tilde symbol. So if you add the tilde symbol to either side of your Handlebars token, like this is an example with blocks, it will kill all the white space characters, including new lines and tabs, up until the next Handlebars or non-white space character. So you can do it with properties, helpers, it works with the new decorators, even new comments. You've got a lot of control with this, and so if you care about how your rendered HTML or rendered template looks, then you can do something about it. Pre-compilation. So whenever you use Handlebars on the client, you pretty much always have to solve this problem of how to get your templates, which are on your server, into your client so you can use them. In my early days of Handlebars, I used some weird jQuery Ajax, just garbage. It was horrible, and I definitely felt like a Handlebars noob. The way to do it, if you're dealing with the same problems that I had, is to pre-compile your templates. And so pre-compilation, here's an example of how to make it work in Grunt. Gulp is a little more verbose, but it is definitely doable. And what this will do is it'll take your .hbars or .handlebars or whatever you're calling it, and it will pre-compile those, so it'll get them ready to be run in your browser, and then it will concatenate that into a JavaScript file, which is very easy to include, and when that JavaScript file runs, it registers all those handlebars in your global handlebars object or wherever you want it to be. So then they're just ready to call straight from there. You don't have to compile them in your server. It makes it really convenient. Okay, so that's 15 bullet points. I have stickers, Pluralsight stickers. I have free 1-month Pluralsight passes if you're interested, and free Japanese music. This is my stuff. Questions? Or you can just go. So if you pre-compile your templates, so the white space is really useful when you're getting some rendered output. And so that's where it gets you. Because with your templates, usually, you make them how you want them to look, but once Handlebars gives them back, it has abused them horribly, and so you're just, you don't know what to expect. So that's where it matters in your rendered output. So yes, if you pre-compile, if you care about it, you still want to do that. Okay. Thank you.